Hey guys, what's up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as usual, let's go over the market, let's go over Tesla, let's talk about what has happened, what we can expect for the rest of the week. A pretty interesting week as usual. It seems like every week is interesting nowadays ahead of us because tomorrow we have CPI day. So yeah, all that being said, market's about to close in about half a minute. So Tesla most likely ending the day around this 194.5 mark, which is down about 1.2%, we'll say roughly. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button as usual. And again, this is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. Make your own decisions, do your own research. But again, let's talk about it. So Tesla, you can see the candle right on the daily. This is the daily chart. You know, this kind of candle is, you know, the candle that usually kind of potentially can signal reversals, but this is not an area where it hasn't really had much of a trend in this case to signal a true reversal. So this to me, all this really shows to me right now, which makes sense, is indecision. Right, this shows me a lot of indecision between bears and bulls. You can see the volume is definitely on the lower end today. Nothing like completely like, you know, worrisome, not like something back here, for instance, but you know, it's definitely a little bit on the lower end. And again, the main thing it shows me is that there is, of course, indecision, which, like I said, makes sense since tomorrow is, of course, CPI day. And apparently, rather, tomorrow's CPI data that's coming in is different than pretty much we've had before. Because before, if I'm not mistaken, they've always compared it to the prior 2 years. But I think tomorrow's data is the first time they're only comparing it to just the prior single year. So it's going to be, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not sure. It feels like the data is trying to be skewed for some specific way, maybe to try and show CPI is not as bad. I'm not really sure, honestly. But the point is, it's going to be shown differently than before. So, you know, there is definitely some indecision happening there with Tesla. I mean, it did come down pretty low. I think it was down about 4% at the lowest point or something like that, which it did recover pretty nicely, right? Above the 190 mark. You know, but you know, again, this just shows indecision, and I personally wouldn't be surprised if we kind of between this 200 to as low as 180 have a little bit of, you know, sideways action, and we essentially for the rest of this week, or for at least for the majority of this week, kind of go like something like this. You know, maybe a little bit lower than this, but like you get the idea. Anywhere between 200 to like 180, I really think we'll just kind of go like up, down, up, down, up, down within that general area. Probably get some bulls and bear traps here and there for the week. I honestly don't think it's going to be that much of a week in terms of you know, actual movement like somewhere crazy. You know, I think this will just, again, just my prediction, but I do think this will be a little bit more of a sideways week. But again, you never know. It really just depends on what happens tomorrow with CPI, because at this point it's just, man, who knows, especially with the way they're going to be presenting the data this time. So it's really hard to tell. The one thing I do want to mention is that for the majority of the day, the VIX was actually green, with the market being green, which, by the way, Tesla is, of course, underperforming the market today compared to, you know, QQQ and SPY, right? Definitely a decent underperformance, but the VIX was actually green for the majority of the day, while the market was green for pretty much all day. So that's a little bit concerning. So definitely want to watch out for that. I do think that the market is, I don't know, it just feels like it's ready to go down. But that's just me, though. And yeah, so we'll see what happens. You can also argue that the SPY is kind of in a potential bull flag. In all honesty, you can definitely argue this being a bit of a bull flag. So we'll see how this ends up overall playing out right here. It's definitely near the topper part of this flag. So if it's going to fall, I mean, tomorrow is going to be the day for it to fall, you know, from CPI. So, you know, I do think that Tesla, even if it falls, it might come down to the 100-day moving average exactly, which is around 185. That is possible. We got very close to it today, but ultimately, if I had to take a, you know, a guess, if you will, you know, like an educated guess as to what I think Tesla will do, I do think there's a bit more downside potential than there is upside, mainly because I don't think we'll go much higher than this kind of, you know, 197 to 200 level. I don't think we'll breach 200. We might, of course, you never really know with this, you know, with this market, with Tesla, but I just don't think that we'll go over 200. And if we do, it's probably going to be brief and not much higher. Ultimately, if I had to take a guess, I do think that there's a higher chance, like maybe like a 70% chance of us coming down to like about 180 roughly, which will be the bottom of this trend line roughly. And then if we come down over here, we can probably look for a bounce on Tesla. I definitely can see that happening, right? So that's something to consider. And then I think from here, we might actually get a natural bounce to 200, and then I think we'll go lower, right? So that's kind of what I personally see happening, right? Something like this. I don't know why I keep zigzagging this, but I do think that something along the lines of this, more or less like this right here, is going to be the movement for Tesla that I personally expect. And if this were to happen, I do also expect it to be essentially forming a bit of a bull flag like this, and then we get this kind of zigzag move through it, get the cup and handle also formation happening here as well, right? You can argue it being a bull flag, right, like this, or a cup and handle, which is kind of like this into the handle, right? Whichever way you want to argue it. that's kind of the gist of the movement I'm personally foreseeing coming, for maybe like the remainder of the month, maybe a little bit into the next month or something like that. Now, that's just the most simplistic way of putting it. Obviously, the market, especially nowadays, is anything but simplistic, so that's just something else to consider. But that's kind of the movement I see. You can also see the Bollinger Band is definitely quite expanded, so I'm definitely expecting, a move downwards, kind of closer to the white line, which you can see is actually around 170, and I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of fall back down under it, and then I think potentially as we come down to around this gap fill area of the mid 100, so like 150 give or take, right, something like that, 160, maybe 140. But in this general area, I expect us to potentially come down to, and then ultimately go a little bit sideways, the Bollinger Band potentially converging, kind of squeezing, if you will, right? And then it explodes one direction, which I'm hoping for will be to the top, right? I do think that there's a decent chance that it will be to the top and that the bullish formation will play out. But you have to also always consider the fact that maybe it just simply won't, because we are, of course, still in some pretty, interesting times in the markets, in the financial, just area in general, macroeconomics, all that stuff, right? So definitely still a lot of headwinds potentially in the future, so it's not easy or for sure to tell, but that's kind of what I'm personally seeing just through technical analysis as an absolute possibility. So again, short term, some pain, of course, but then overall the medium to long term, I do think the bulls are potentially going to get control back into Tesla and make its way back up even higher than this level over here over the next, let's say, maybe half a year or something like that, maybe a little bit longer, right? That's kind of what I'm personally foreseeing as well. You can see the 5 and the 10-day moving average, we're just barely keeping above those bad boys right here, so that's very, very close. Did bounce off the 10-day moving average today. However, we are below the 5, so again, a little bit of indecision there as well, so keep that in mind, right? It feels like the market's not sure where to put Tesla moving forward. The 50-day moving average, you can see, is also well below us, sitting at pretty much 150, which is exactly the level I personally think that will come down to, maybe a little bit lower just for the gap fill, or the gap fill could be a complete bait because everyone will be looking for this and everyone will be waiting for this, and maybe the market purposely stops right before that, which will be somewhere around the 150 mark, which is the 50-day moving average, and maybe that's where we actually get our bounce. That is also a real possibility, right? So that's kind of the general idea and consensus, more or less, that I currently have on how I personally think Tesla will move. If you want like a very quick TLDR, again, I personally think it'll be most likely a drop down to closer to the 180s, most likely a little bit of a bounce closer to 200s, and then most likely from there, I think, is where we're going to ultimately fall down to the mid 100s, and from there, I think we'll potentially find a bit of a base, probably have some sideways action ultimately. And then I think from there, hopefully the bullish thesis, if you will, stays intact, which I'm hoping it will. We get a rally from there and we actually make, not new highs necessarily, maybe actually, honestly, but that will take, of course, even longer, maybe like at least like a year or two. However, I do think that this could potentially be the bottom. This could be the bottom. This could be like the final chance to buy Tesla at these quote unquote discounted prices. But again, that's assuming this bullish formation holds. It very well could not. So we will see. But that's kind of what I'm seeing. So let me know what you think down below. Ladies and gentlemen, the VIX, again, looking like it potentially wants to bounce. Hard to say for sure, though. So I'll have to do a little bit more digging on the VIX to really get a better idea as to whether or not that is the case. Yeah. So let's get a better idea if that is the case or not. But all that being said, market's looking pretty spicy. So we'll see where it ends up overall taking us. SPY's potentially setting up a bull flag here, but it just feels toppy at the same time. Maybe I'm a little bit biased because I do think the market should fall because it did technically fall out of this wedge. So you can either look at it from a bearish perspective, being this little rising wedge that it did break out of and kind of almost retested today, or you can look at it from a bullish perspective where this is just simply a bull flag forming. Which one is correct? Time will tell, but make sure you're ready for both opportunities. But all that being said, thanks for watching, guys. Let me know what you think down below. And the final thing, in case you're wondering what I'm personally doing, is I did have one call that sold call that I exercised last week for 190. It was a 190 call with, of course, the premium was essentially around 196-ish. Technically, I sold if you include the premium. And what I did today was I took those 100 shares that sold on last Friday off that call sell, and I ended up buying 100 shares today around 190, and I ended up selling a 190 call for this Friday, which was about a 7.6, I think, contract. Which pretty much means that as long as Tesla is pretty much bouncing within that range I just talked about earlier, I walk away with profit and I'm good to go. So that's kind of what I'm personally doing right now. But let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you for the next one. Peace.